it's really important for us to lift each other up. That sometimes means the person that you really don't want to lift up. But, the only way we're going to do this is collectively and collaboratively and together to make this change.
Welcome to the One Girl Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Kate Bryan, and I'm thrilled to be back here for another week of this series on incarceration and women. As you know by now, the past few years of my life have been a journey with One Girl Revolution, and one of the topics that has become more and more a part of this journey is the topic of incarceration, especially with regards to women. Women are the fastest growing population within jail and prison, and every incarcerated woman and formerly incarcerated woman's story is unique. There is so much to unpack here, but my hope is that this series can just open our hearts and minds and give these women, these incarcerated women, formerly incarcerated women, and those who are working with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women, a platform to speak from. Stories are a powerful way to get us all thinking about all the facets that women in the world today face. So thank you for listening, and please encourage your friends and family to listen as well. Before we get into this week's episode, please subscribe to the One Girl Revolution podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at One Girl Revo. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at One Girl Revolution, and you can check out our website, onegirlrevolution.com, for more podcast episodes, videos, and so much more. We're doing things a little differently this week. We're revisiting an important episode because still to date, it's one of my favorite episodes of this podcast. It opened my eyes and really set me on this trajectory to look more into the topic of incarceration and led to our now Emmy-nominated documentary, The Girl Inside. The first episode I ever did on incarceration was with Kim Bogucki. Kim is a police detective and co-founder of the IF Project. I had stumbled upon the IF Project one night when I went down a rabbit hole of incarceration on YouTube. Singer Brandi Carlile does a concert every Christmas for incarcerated women, and I stumbled upon a video of that also featured Kim and the IF Project. I literally cold called Kim, and she was so kind to listen to my questions and thoughts, and even more gracious to meet up with me in Michigan when she was here for a Brandi Carlile concert a couple months later. We sat down for an interview for the podcast, and listening back now, I cringed a little for how much I didn't know and how ignorant I was. But I was open, I wanted to learn, and that episode began my journey to where I am now, and I'm still learning and evolving. When I started working on this series, I knew that I needed to have Kim back on and that I wanted to share the original episode with you as well because of how critical and life-changing it was to my own life. So I caught up with Kim a bit recently, and I'm so excited to share some updates on the IF Project with you in this episode. And I'm also excited to share the original interview with Kim from 2 years ago. It's crazy that it's been 2 years. So much has obviously happened since with COVID and life, and she has a lot to share. I know you're going to love this episode with Kim as much as I do. She is such a powerful force to be reckoned with. And the IF Project is building an army that is empowering women to fulfill their purpose and passions. They're incredible. So without further ado, here's Kim. Kim, it has been 2 years since I had you on the podcast, and I'm so grateful to have you back to give a little update on everything that the IF Project is doing. And I know that the last 2 years have just been crazy for everybody who's listening with COVID and everything, but I'd love to just hear from you. What has the IF Project been up to? I know that you have pivoted, people talk about pivoting, but I've seen so much innovation from you guys because not being able to go into the prisons and, working on your programming still and finding like innovative ways to reach the people who are inside. So I'd love to hear from you over the past 2 years. What have you guys been up to?
Wow. I can't believe it's already been 2 years. Well, we've actually been up to a lot. And I think that one thing that COVID brought, I guess I hope COVID brought to everybody is it kind of put everybody on a level playing field. Obviously, I wasn't incarcerated, but there was still that fear of getting something that could, hurt or kill me, or I could actually give to somebody else. So how to navigate through that and still be able to do the service that's needed for people that are marginalized or incarcerated and make sure that they're not left out, because I know that there was some really interesting things that happened because we had never seen anything like this in the prison system. Like, what do you do? Because you're basically in an incubating petri dish inside there, and nobody knew what to do globally, let alone nationally. And I think the one thing that, if, like you said, we've always just tried to figure out, okay, like, let's not say can't do anything. Let's, like, what can we do? What do we have the means to do? And we were really fortunate with working with the Seattle Police Department with the Bureau of Justice COPE grant, which is for opioid affected folks, and working on reentry for them, women specific, to be able to take some of that grant money and buy laptop computers for the work release facility in Seattle and boost their Wi-Fi throughout the house so that we could figure out how to pivot. That's going to be the word of 2020, pivot to virtual administration of programming, which in itself is difficult because you're not face to face with somebody. You're not like sitting down and like looking in their eyes or having a conversation in such a, static way on a screen. But it was the one way that we felt like we could still go in and say, hey, we're here, connect, and offer programming inside work release.
Yeah, it's amazing what you guys have done. And I've loved following you on social media. I'll be sure to post all of your website and your social media, so people, if they're not already following, because you've been on the podcast before, if they're not already following what you're doing, they'll be able to continue to follow you. Do you feel like right now, as things are opening up around the world, do you feel like your programming is changing a little bit? Like you're kind of going back to, I don't want to say normal, I don't know what that is, but like if
There's no
are you
more
guys
normal
going back,
left.
there's no more normal.
No, there's not.
But what is your programming like now? So you're doing, I'm sure you're still doing some of the virtual stuff,
Right.
and you've been able to probably reach even more people through the virtual in some ways, in some capacity. But are you guys back in the prisons as well?
We've been able to get into there's only 2 women's prisons in Washington state right now, but actually this afternoon, we're going to do a documentary screening and a panel in Portland, Maine, in the women's prison there, which is exciting. And I think it's twofold. I think that when you can do virtual, yes, you can have people from wherever they're sitting outside the prison be able to pipe into the prison and offer programming and assistance, et cetera. I kind of feel like it would be great to go to a hybrid model to where you can do that sometimes, because we all know prisons are built way the heck out of the city. I mean, from Seattle, it can take you 3 hours sometimes to get out there. So that's a long day if you're trying to do only a 2-hour implementation. So if we could do the virtual thing and then maybe hybrid, go in twice a month, so you actually have that physicality of being in the same room, and it's just a different energy than being online. But regardless, I would take virtual if that's all we could do. And how else can we push other departments of corrections to really take a look at Wi-Fi's coming into the prisons? I know a lot of them are looking at and are currently using them to conduct college classes. So I think we're kind of to the age where we can hopefully figure out how to put the safety and issues, which there is issues with that, but be able to get people that are incarcerated access so that they can prepare to come home much more educated on what they need and understanding. And I kind of look at prison like how do we prepare people to be better individuals when they come home? For example, for women, if 85% of them are mothers that are incarcerated, if they have the access to Wi-Fi, and thank God they had video conferencing now so they could see their kids because they couldn't come in to visit anymore. And that can be detrimental for both sides, not just the woman that's locked up, but the child that, needs to see their mom's face if they can't be in front of them. And at least they could have done that with video.
Yeah.
And I think that Department of Corrections are, trying to figure out how to have that access, keep things safely. I don't know what it's like for you guys in Detroit, but, we're also having a hard time across the board. There's just not staffing levels, which then, for Department of Corrections, but across the board, there's not staffing levels. But how do you maintain, safety and security and still be able to offer these things? So virtual might be the wave of the future. I'm hoping that that as a result of COVID, it is implemented in more places and allows more access, but still allows that physicality of walking in. In Washington State, we're still shut down for the most part. The IF project, however, works with Department of Corrections. So we do have the access to start going in. So that's getting looked at, what it looks like, who's vaccinated, who's not. I mean, there's so many factors. Yeah. My God, you think we'd ever be talking about vaccinations and global pandemic last time we talked?
No way. It's crazy to think about. We were at a concert when we after
God.
we did the interview, and I'm like, I don't even know what that feels like anymore. I can't remember what it feels like to be at a concert.
There's
But
there's no, there is no normal, but you
mhm,
can't, the work can't stop. So it's like, how do we figure out, okay, this is what we have. What can we do right now to make a difference and to also take care of ourselves?
yeah,
That's critically important too. I don't want to, I was talking to another state 2 weeks ago that she'll be, I won't tell you who it is, basically that. And I was shocked because there's no mask mandate. They have visits, they have people going in and out, and they're like, hey, do you want to come? And I'm like, can we just wait till next spring? Because I don't also want to be the carrier that brings something in and gets a lot of people sick.
right.
So many factors to take a look at with COVID, but the bottom line is the work still has to keep getting done. And how are
Mhm.
we doing that?
Yeah,
In
it's
the
so
midst of
complex.
us dealing personally with the own effects of COVID, in our lives and the losses that a lot of us have experienced.
It's so true. There's so many facets to it, both personally and then professionally, and people learning, how they can continue to do their work no matter what realm they work in. But I just have loved watching everything that you're doing at the If Project and how you have continued your work. And then I think opened up other opportunities for people to be a part of your programming. And then I know you have a lot of things up and coming. What are some things that you guys are working on for the future? I don't want to ask you what you think you guys are going to be doing 5 or 10 years down the line, because I feel like 2 years, I never could have
Two
fathomed
weeks,
what
2 weeks at
2
this point. No,
weeks.
I'm just
Yeah,
kidding.
but like, what are some things that you guys have working on? Obviously, you're working on getting more access and working on the digital programming, but what are some things that you guys have coming up?
Well, I think more importantly, what we have more than what we have coming up is at the beginning of IF's creation with the Women Inside Washington Correction Center for Women. The mindset has always been to have somebody run the organization that has been previously incarcerated. Obviously, be great if they can understand IF. And we've been fortunate enough to be able to hire a couple people in the last couple years that not only helped start the organization, but like one of them's got their PhD in psychology. So we just brought on Dr. Felissa Bryant, who's done a lot of work at another organization that does this kind of work. And she's, now she's the director of programs. We have Lakeisha Hamilton from our documentary that was one of the pillars that helped us stop. She's, in charge of community outreach. And then we have a couple more folks that bring different expertise as far as facilitation and training of workshops and, case management. One of our case manager woman actually worked for a Department of Corrections for 2 years. So she understands the system they're coming from and then switched to the other side. And she's working on her 6th year of doing stuff on the outside to provide, resource and service for returning women. So I feel like the interesting part of the ups and downs in the last 2 years has been IF getting focused on moving forward, being, run by folks that have actually been impacted. And then as a part of just understanding, this national reckoning and where there have been severe inequity gaps, how to make sure that people are given the resources, needs, and training so that they can be successful in doing this work, because those are gaps that we haven't been bridging in this country for a very long time. So we're kind of focusing on getting that done as well. And I'm excited to see where IF is going to be in the next, 2 weeks to 2 years to 5 years.
Same. Well, I can't wait for people to hear. We're gonna revisit your episode so people will be able to hear our full interview from 2 years ago. Don't judge us because we had no idea that a global pandemic was coming up when we were talking about our hopes and dreams for the IF Project. But I'll encourage everybody to watch the documentary. It was life-changing for me. And Kim, like I shared with you before, that my conversation with you and then watching that documentary just changed my life and has gotten me interested in the issue of incarceration. So thank you for all the great work that you're doing. And I encourage everybody to watch the documentary, follow you guys on social media. I will post your website so if people want to donate and support your work. Before I let you go, Kim, I always end this podcast, and I'll end our little conversation here with the question. If you could leave women and girls around the world with one message right now, what would it be?
Well, first of all, I need to thank you for your work before I answer that, because I don't want that to go unnoticed, because
Thanks, Kim.
you do something that's important, which is you give a voice. Sometimes it's often silenced. And hopefully you give people the perspective and understanding that changes hearts and minds. So I appreciate that. So in that vein, I would say to women and girls, it's really important for us to lift each other up. That sometimes means the person that you really don't want to lift up. But, the only way we're going to do this is collectively and collaboratively and together to make this change. So thank you for being a part of that, Kate.
Well, thank you for being a part of it and being such an inspiration. And to everybody at the IF Project, I'm just giving them a big shout out because I know that it is more than one person. It's more than a one girl revolution. It is a lot of people. It's the army behind. So thank you for all the great work that you do. And I'm excited to see where you guys go from here.
Thank you, Kate.
Here's my original conversation with Kim Bogucki, co-founder of the IF Project from June 2019. Kim, welcome to the One Girl Revolution podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to be sitting with you because, we talked a month ago, just about the IF Project. And one night I had kind of gone down this rabbit hole of looking at women in jail because I've been thinking a lot about forgotten populations. And that's obviously a forgotten population in our world. And came across a video about the IF Project and your story. And so I'm really, really excited to have you on the podcast. And I know all the women who are listening are excited to hear from you.
Right. Well, I'm happy to be here.
We're sitting in Michigan, which how do you like Michigan so far?
I love it. The food is great. It's very green and the sun's been out the whole time. So
good. So Michigan's treating you well.
It is, yes.
And you're from Seattle. You're from Washington.
Born and raised.
So how did you get into, because you're a cop, how did you get into law enforcement?
Oh, wow. Now you're making me go back like 31 years because I'm old. I went to Seattle University and graduated from there and started taking a look at criminal justice. And a police officer came in and spoke to our class. And I had an experience with homeless kids on the street when I was 18 with a program. And I would remember leaving that program going, oh, wow, like these kids are really close to my age and what can I do? And I want to do something with kids. And this officer came into our criminal justice class and started talking about her job and her work with kids. And so the light bulb kind of went off and I graduated and filled out the application for police and fire the same week. And police responded first and started my journey in policing.
That's awesome. That's great. And it's been a great journey since. I'm sure it's difficult as well.
Oh yeah. I think policing, especially today, it's definitely full of ups and downs. And historically, there's some things that police have done that have been a part of that we need to continue taking a look at and apologize for. Part of it is mass incarceration. So it's a really delicate balance between having to go and be there and enforce laws that the people have decided need to be enforced and also make sure that we're continuing to hopefully build community back up that we've been a part of fracturing.
What's the hardest thing about your job in law enforcement? I want to talk about the IF Project, but what's the hardest thing about your job?
Wow, that's a good question. I think the hardest thing about the job is kind of what community would say too, or maybe even people that are incarcerated, is there's a person underneath a uniform, just like there's a person behind a label that we've given them, whether it's police officer or felon, quite honestly, and that we actually have a lot more in common that we need to understand. And it's hard when media gets attached to something and kind of goes down a rabbit hole with it. And I don't feel like either side is properly represented. And for some reason, I feel like society really likes to see implosion in people's lives all the way around. So we don't have a lot of understanding of the story behind each side and what happened. And so I think that the hardest thing is that people are very, very quick to judge on both sides of people that we're arresting and then the people that are doing the arresting. So and I think that people don't realize really what an officer's day is like every single day, and a constant exposure to trauma. And when that is not dealt with, the quality of life that ends up ensuing as a result of that.
Yeah.
And not a lot of community support. And sometimes it's exactly how it should be because officers are human beings and make mistakes, So I think I think the trauma, I don't think people realize the trauma and the effect, and you can get yelled and screamed at one day, yet that's going to be the person that calls you the next day and says, can you please help me? And you have to, you do that because that's what you signed up to do.
Right.
And I think most police officers actually, they don't take the job to go hurt somebody. They take the job to help people. And sometimes that's hard when you're getting beat up a lot.
Yeah. What's the best part about your job?
Oh, the best part about my job is when a kid comes up and says they want to be a cop or they say thank you. or community like we have that understanding that there's those small moments of, wow, we're a lot more similar than we realize, and when things start getting a little bit smoother.
So I want to talk about the IF Project, because I have been so just blown away by the IF Project, and I've had so many great conversations with people since I saw the documentary that's on iTunes, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But how did the IF Project start?
Completely organically. It started when I was doing another project called the West Side Story Project, which was kind of unprecedented and got some national press because it was Broadway theater, inner city kids and police bringing West Side Story to it was 50-year anniversary, and having conversation and building basically a summit around using vignettes from West Side Story, talking about gangs and police and youth relation, the juvenile justice system, and immigration discrimination. And when I got a call from Girl Scouts Beyond Bars, and there's not very many of these troops left in the country, but this is a good reason why everybody should buy the cookies, is that they actually have troops that are comprised of girls whose mothers are incarcerated, and they take the girls into the prison and actually have troop meetings inside the prison.
Wow.
So they saw the West Side Story Project, and they said, hey, can you come work with our girls? And I'm like, absolutely, but I really want to go to the prison and ask the mother's permission first, because that family unification was happening, and the last thing I wanted to do was have that mother inside a prison think, oh my God, what are the police doing or saying to my daughter about me? So I went down to Purdy or WCCW and walked in, and it's no joke, I really thought I was going to get shanked because I'd been watching way too much reality TV, and I walked in and kind of had to have like a whole reevaluation of me doing what I thought was community policing at the time, because I had so much judgment, and when I walked in the room they looked like people that I would hang out with, not what I had been arresting for years. So that was a big eye-opener for me, and we started having a conversation. They did not, they didn't want to have anything to do with me because I was police and I was the other. But as soon as I started asking them, would their children call the police if they were victims, then all of a sudden things switched, because they hadn't ever thought about that. And so they started sharing their stories, and that's when I randomly asked that if question, which is if there was something somebody could have said or done to change the path that led you here, what would it have been? And they kind of looked at me and really didn't say a whole lot. But one of the women in there, Renata Abramson, Renata's backstory, it's not a matter if, it was a matter when and for how long you went to prison. It's a legacy. It was a family business, really. She took that question and had her own reflection around it, and decided to start asking the women to write their answers down. So when I went back into the prison, in and out for a couple months to spend the night with Girl Scouts, she handed me a stack of papers, and they were the answers to the if question, and the if question was kind of born. And from that, everything just snowballed. She's like, oh my gosh, everybody wants to answer this question, and I have to, sometimes I have to check them and say, yes, it's for the police, but it's to make change. It's not to, you're not snitching or anything like that. So
yeah.
It was super powerful of two really opposing sides coming together to make change.
I posted something on social media a couple weeks ago about the if question, because since I watched the documentary and since I learned about the if project, I've really been internalizing that question, if X happened, how would your life be different, good or bad?
Yeah.
And I think it's so powerful for other people. And I'm sure it's been a journey for you.
Oh yeah. I think it's something that question, even though we use it in the realm of like incarceration to make change, is a question that everybody could ask themselves to figure out, okay, I want to get here. What do I need? How do I ask for help? Who's been there along the way? Or working with somebody, a young person too, like what do they need moving forward? How is it okay to come to an adult and ask for help? Like I think it's a question that can be used in a lot of different places, that we're looking at even using it in the homeless population as well, to get the story out, because it's kind of like what you and I have talked about, is story is such a powerful game changer, because it's the little chords of commonality that we can find in places that we never thought we could find it, that start building the connection that we need to make change. And the only way we do that is sharing personal stories, because we might look different, live in a different neighborhood, come from a different country, whatever it is, but we have so much more in common than we actually realize, and the only way to understand that is through story.
Yeah. Well, and in a world that's so divisive and there's just so much division, and particularly amongst women, I feel like there's so much division amongst women. It's so beautiful to find these ways that we can actually build bridges and say, look, I'm the same in that. And even, when I've read some things about the If Project, there are so many stories that I'm like, oh my gosh, like I may not have walked the same path that they have, but I see so much commonality with them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that I wish we could have an honest conversation with ourselves about what I like to call the female affliction of low self-esteem. Because no matter what anybody says, every female that I know suffers from it in some way or another. And men might have it, but you don't know. And they don't tear each other down like we do as women when we get, maybe backed in a corner, we're feeling uncomfortable. But also, I think it impedes our ability to really rise up and make progress collectively, because we're still battling with each other, and it does keep us oppressed, and it does keep us down, and it doesn't matter who you are as a female or where you come from. But I mean, I really hope that, figuring out why we do what we do to each other, and in figuring that out, I think that finding the ability to make change in ourselves will end up making change in the world, because I do feel like women are gatekeepers on so many levels, and we have not risen up and taken care of ourselves enough to be able to make the change that we need to make, which will make the world a better place.
Yeah, and just the power that women particularly have, which we were talking about before, is the power that women have to not only change their trajectory, the trajectory of their lives, but also their children, and like for generations to come. If you can get one woman to make a change, she can change. She has the power to change it for the rest of generations to come.
Absolutely, and that's why, like with If, we've chosen to do a lot of our focus with women, because we know that 85% of incarcerated women are mothers. So just that basic statistic alone means that the potential next generation of incarceration, and I'm not saying their kids are going to all end up in prison, but they've got that going against them. When you remove a woman from a community or that ecosystem, you change the entire system, because that child or the children at home will drastically be affected. And we need to be looking at that in corrections and I think in law enforcement too. How are we dealing with women in a world where everybody wants equal rights? We really need to change the lens on how we deal with females when we come across them, because the criminogenic factors as well that lead women to prison versus what leads men, the 4 factors, not one of the top 4 is the same. So we can't keep doing what we're doing in the system and expect anything to change, because it won't change. We have to deal with women differently. And in doing that, and hopefully getting them happier or healthier or more understanding of the trauma that most of us have experienced and how that plays out as adults, getting that healed up means that those kids don't have to follow in the same footsteps and end up potentially incarcerated. And I really think women are the gatekeepers to understanding and trying to change this mass incarceration lens. I think incarcerated females are the most silent voice that we have in our country, yet we're talking about ending mass incarceration, and we don't have a lot of focus on females. Being gender responsive is something new, and it needs to be very amplified, because they got kids. Those collateral consequences of putting handcuffs on somebody and a female ending up incarcerated is huge. It goes deep, and it does continue that generational or that legacy of incarceration as a result of, and no disrespect to men and men that are fathers and stuff like that, but usually when a woman gets out of prison, it's like, here's your kids. When a man gets out of prison, it's not, here's your kids. So a woman's got to deal with taking care of herself and these other mouths,
and get
a job, and get housing, and not just for herself. And we as a society, women are the nurturers in the family, so it's a big transition for them, much bigger. And I've talked to a lot of the men about it, and they're like, yeah, we don't have that type of transition. Not saying that it's easy for them either, because of the judgment of having a record, but for women, it's dramatically different.
If you're enjoying this episode of the One Girl Revolution podcast, you can see more about the lives, struggles, hopes, and dreams of incarcerated women in One Girl Revolution's The Girl Inside on YouTube. The Girl Inside is a short documentary. It's only 10 minutes, so not a huge commitment, that features the stories and voices of 5 incarcerated women at Cook County Jail and an academic storytelling class that changed their lives. The link is in the show notes. Please watch and share The Girl Inside today. And now back to the show. And since 1985, women are the fastest growing population within prisons. Is that correct?
Yep. In the U.S., it's up like 850-something% since the late 80s. But globally, across the world, it's the Penal Reform International is reporting that women are actually getting arrested at a higher rate across the world than men, period. So
Wow.
we're seeing women and girls going into the system, which again affects the entire ecosystem across the world. So it's an issue.
What are some of the factors? You mentioned that there were kind of 4 main factors. Like, what are some of the factors?
Unhealthy relationship. And this is the work from Dr. Emily Salisbury at UNLV and her colleagues. It's called the Female 4. Unhealthy relationships, socioeconomic marginality, no surprise. Because if you think about that too, women can't bail themselves out or pay their fines.
Right.
Because of the socioeconomic marginality, which affects all females. So unhealthy relationships, socioeconomic marginality, chemical dependency, and also anxious depressive symptom. So you've got those 4. In men, it's previous criminal record, antisocial behavior, antisocial environment, and antisocial friends. So they are dealing with their trauma, and the men are starting to talk about the trauma very differently than women are. Women are going to like bad relationship, potentially get involved in drugs or alcohol to numb whatever trauma hasn't been dealt with, which is going to produce anxious depressive symptom. And I think the new report too is that 80% of women that are incarcerated have a diagnosable mental health illness. So that's not been taken care of at some point, probably as a result from trauma, early childhood trauma, but trauma in general.
Yeah.
And we as women deal with our trauma very differently than men.
Yeah. We kind of push it down. I think a lot of times we push it down. We're like, I don't really need help. I'll just power through, especially if they have children. It's like you stay busy on all the
You
other
look for
things.
love in all the wrong places and you self-medicate.
Yeah.
So, and men don't necessarily do that. And, it's interesting when we have conversations with men, they're like, oh my gosh, I did not realize that is how I treat my significant other. You walk into a women's prison, you ask, who's doing time for their husband or their old man or their relationship? You got like 80% of the hands that go up. You walk into a men's prison, absolutely not.
Wow.
Does not. You walk into a men's prison, you look at who has money on their books. A lot of these men have women on the outside, they're putting money on their books. You walk into a women's prison, they don't got money on their books.
Wow.
So even that changes the whole experience of being incarcerated as well. There is disproportionality in that.
So back to the IF project. So you and Renata started collecting these notes or these letters, the IF question, answers to the IF
essays,
question, the essays. Yeah. And so how did it transition into the IF project, what it is now?
So I got a hold of Kathleen Horan, who actually is the another one of the co-founders and did our documentary that she spoke of earlier. That was filmed for 7.5 years. So was definitely a labor of love for her. But I got a hold of her and she was looking at doing some other stuff with me with some work that I was doing around the homeless community, young youth. And I said, might want to look at these. And so she looked at them and she's like, oh my gosh, there's so much information and richness in this. So she flew up and we got a group of women together. We had 2 groups of 50 and we brought them into the room and we're like, what do you want to do with this? Because you are powerful and your stories are powerful. And so we kind of knew we wanted to do video or something like that to get it out there. But they were like, we want to get it to the kids. We want to get our stories out to the kids in hopes that they will learn from our mistakes and not have to follow in our footsteps to prison. So right there is like, wow, you're not asking for to get paid, to get time off, to get canteen. Like you want to take your story and make change. So that is where the power has been for it. And so we got together with Amber Flame, who's now kind of the director of IF, and put together a writing workshop, which the documentary highlights that writing workshop. We've actually spun 6 different programs besides the writing workshop off of the answers to that question. So that is where IF is now. Like every single time somebody writes their answer down, it kind of goes into, okay, what do we need to do to fill the gap that wasn't there in the system? That the system can't afford to do, and always having people at the table with that answer to make sure that our programming is relevant and actually applicable to what needs to be happening. So that's what happened. So we did the writing workshop, started having women show up, really started unpacking some stuff. We have women that have gone through 7 or 8 times the same writing workshop because they want to just figure out where their own gaps are, where those holes are, and how can they fill it with something healthy when they get out and not go back into their old ways. So what started out as wanting to help the kids, which we have a full youth piece and it absolutely does, turned into it helping themselves. And that was something that organic. So it's a very holistic way of looking at that question, not the intervention or prevention piece only, but also that reducing recidivism and incarceration and healing for the people that are participating.
So you have the writing workshops, and there are a lot of facets to the IF project. Can you talk about that, all the different facets?
So we have the writing workshop, which is kind of like our core thing. That's where we kind of like people to start. And then we found that people really enjoyed writing and sharing because they also started building community within the institution, not realizing, my gosh, our stories are similar. I had no idea because you don't talk about that stuff when you're incarcerated. You just don't. And then we developed like just a monthly writing workshop, a writer series. So they come up and there's topics that are specific to the month. Anybody can come. And then from that, we started to take a look at what Department of Corrections didn't have the capacity to give the women. So they came up with some topics of stuff that they wanted. So we put together a health and wellness series. So like we have an OBGYN that comes in and goes, the doctor is in. So they get to ask all those questions that a lot of them didn't even have parents to take care of them. So it's like you're educating from a level sometimes of high school or junior high. Unhealthy relationships, like we have relationship modules because that's super significant within the female institution.
Right.
So those 10 are topic specific. That's health and wellness. So that's the series that they go through. And then we just got a second chance at grant 3 years ago. We're wrapping that up this year in October, where they started looking at prep program, standing for Personal Reentry Education Plan. So we sat down with some of the women that were frequent flyers in and out, like what was missing, what do you need, what can you get inside here that prepares you better for getting out. So they helped us write this prep program, and we have an external prep piece now that the women that helped us write it are now getting out, and now it's like, okay, what do we need to change because now we're applying this program. So we've got an internship program as a result where we hire some of our clients, and they help us stay on track to make sure our programming is actually relevant and works.
Yeah.
So, and then we have a mentoring program, which is what it is. People volunteer to mentor a woman for 1 year before she gets out, which for some women that's pretty significant because they haven't had a visit in 10 years or a letter. And then they stay a year with them on the outside too. Super labor intensive. And I think it's good for a community to really understand what reentry it looks like because it's a lot different than what people think it is. So they've been good advocates for this kind of work, having somebody from community walk side by side with somebody that's getting out going, I had no idea how difficult it is. And then our youth piece, which also is where things started. I have a group of formerly incarcerated men and women, and we go into schools, detention centers, community centers. We have a video that's about 40 minutes long where we filmed 20 inside the women's institution, 20 inside the men's institution, kind of bringing the voices from the, inside out, not scared straight in any capacity, but just like from their hearts, the things that they wish they would have asked for. And then my team actually that have been formerly impacted, they teach the whole workshop to the kids. And I will tell you, I have never seen in my 31 years of policing kids actually lean forward and get engaged like I do with our youth piece because they instantly connect with somebody that has been there, and they sometimes know they might be on the way there, or with 1 in 3 people in our country that now have a record, they know somebody that's been there, whether it's a parent or family member. So now they get to see somebody that's come out on the other side and is what they would see as successful. And it's powerful for both sides. And we get these kids to ask for help.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really good thing for the team to experience sharing their story and seeing that story, which was probably a really bad time in their life, can actually make change in a youngster's life. So again, it's that holistic piece that IF offers.
We all have those things in our life, all the, how our life is impacted by different things that happen to us, or, things that happen in our lives, happen to us, that we can use them for good. And so that's what's really cool too, is a lot of these people are able to turn around and help others.
Yep. And they want to do that. And honestly, they probably would not be involved in if they did not want to help somebody else. And what they really don't realize is that it's helping themselves. And they'll come to that epiphany too. And it's interesting because they'll be like, I had no idea it was going to help me. And it's like, it's okay that it's helping you. You're helping them, and it's helping you, and it's helping me. To understand how we can change a system with understanding what led you to where you ended up. If we don't understand that, we can't change anything.
Yeah.
And you are brave enough to show up and share your story, and as a result, change the world.
Yeah. It's therapeutic to be able to tell your story. Can you talk about that a little bit? The therapy of storytelling and maybe some of the impact that you've seen?
Oh, I think the therapy of storytelling. I think in some regards, I do think as well, when we're doing our writing workshops, writing your story down,
Yes.
pen to paper, not perfectly fonted, grammatically correct in this world of technology, like loops and whirls, an individual thing that pours out on the paper, and the emotion behind it is extremely powerful too. We forget the individual these days and we go to like the masses. So I think that individualized storytelling is extremely powerful. And then from that, finding those common threads that exist in all of us that we did not think were there, or we'd never fathom that we would have something in common with that person. And okay, well, they're brave enough to tell their story. What have I not talked about that I need to, that will make me healthier and more whole, or get out and share in, some platform? I come from policing. I'm white, I'm privileged, and I'm in a position of power and authority. So for me as well, it's like I could sit back on that, or I feel like it's part of, like, I don't know, moral obligation and something I want to do to like kick doors open so these voices that need to be heard, that have been silent for so long, can get out there. And if I have to use my position of power to do it, that's exactly how I feel like I can use it in a positive way. And so I think part of storytelling too is, if you're in positions of power, what stories do we need to be getting out there to make change so we don't have so much violence and destruction in the world? We quit tearing each other down and we actually start working together. That's the only way we're going to make change.
Yeah. What about what have you learned about the world through the If Project, and what have you learned about yourself?
I have learned that the world, again, I go back to this thing, that there is a fabric that's woven that we don't see. It's invisible, and when it comes to light, it's pretty powerful to see people connect and learn from each other. I've learned that the world is extremely, as well, very cruel and judgmental and unkind. And as a result of the simple act of being kind and actively listening to somebody can change things on so many different levels we don't always see. It's not going to necessarily be a more money or a bigger job or whatever, but it can have a change. It can change somebody's heart and somebody's soul. And I think that's been really interesting to watch both sides of that, like when somebody's harsh and judged and the impact that it has. And we've had that with our clients. But when I see them go, you know what, this is not okay, and I'm going to rise up and I'm going to step forward and I'm going to do this. We have one client that just got into law school, and she took her criminal mind, which was very honed, and flipped it and said, you know what, I'm going to take this mind that I have and I'm going to put it to something positive. And she's going to go change the world instead of doing what she was doing that was hurting the world and herself. You know, that's powerful to see.
Yeah.
How has it changed me? I try, but I'm human. I try to be a lot less judgmental. I try to figure out, I want to ask why. I don't want to, sometimes it's the obvious, like somebody gets arrested, they committed this crime. I want to know what led them there, because I want to figure out how to change that. And I'm not so stuck in the moment of what happened. I want to figure out, how do you take that moment and how do we figure out how to stop those moments, and I also just I have friends that are murderers. I wouldn't have said that 20 years ago. I mean, I went on a traffic stop and this guy came up, he'd done 10 years for murder. And I remember walking up to the car having all these, I was afraid and I was this, and I'm not saying people shouldn't be afraid. It's a natural response, but I wish I would have known what led him to that, because I know friends of mine that have done time for that and are doing time for it. And there's a story behind it, and it doesn't negate what they did, but it makes a little more sense to me what happened. So I think that, I think for me too, it has allowed my capacity to click out and look at things through a bigger lens, but also really to dive into this female lens that we need to be looking for in corrections and in policing. And that feels like, if people could understand that, we could make a lot more change than we're making. And I think that those are the things that have affected me.
Yeah. Well, even in the If Project documentary, which I hope everybody will listen, I already gave a pitch for that, but it's on iTunes. It opened my eyes so much, because even there's a woman in there who talks about how she murdered somebody, and just her story, it breaks your heart, and you you still even find, I think all of us can find commonality with people no matter what, if we just look for those glimmers of commonality. And we're all human and we all have our struggles we have to deal with, and we all have our things that we're not proud of. You know, everybody has those things in their lives. And so I just encourage everybody to watch it because it just is really powerful. And I'm sure it was powerful filming it too.
Well, it was incredibly powerful. And that's when VC's talking. If anybody watches the documentary, it is on iTunes, and it's definitely worth $4.99. It gives you an understanding.
100%. Yeah.
But we asked her, I said, you need to watch this a couple times because this is extremely powerful and you're in a very, very vulnerable position. And there's no way we're going to put this in the documentary. And Kathleen and I were in agreement, unless you're completely 110% okay with the entire world watching you go through this.
Yes.
You know, and she said, you know what, Kim, it is the first time, and I've been down for a while, it was the first time that I let go of some stuff that I've been holding on to for a very, very long time. And if that would allow somebody else to let go of something they hadn't, then then it's totally worth it, and I'm in. So again, completely selfless.
Yes.
So, you know, that happened. And, we're supported by Looking Out Foundation, which is Brandy Carlisle's foundation, the musician. And the one thing that she said not too long ago when she was on stage, because she had just gone into the prison and played for Our Ladies, is anybody that's incarcerated at some point was somebody's child. So what happened to that child? I do not believe children are born evil. I do think there's a very, very, very small percentage of people that we're just not going to be able to function out here in society. But somewhere along the way, we were not there for those children. I think I get emotional about that because when we go into juvenile prisons and some of these kids are looking at life, they didn't have a shot as soon as they popped out. Like they didn't. And that's a responsibility for us to take a look at those younger years, where we're and what we're doing with these kids that are showing these signs of neglect and abandonment, because we as human beings will survive. And unfortunately, that survival sometimes takes a criminal element onto it. But these were somebody's children a long time ago. And some of them are still stuck in that arrested development. And we need to be doing work at much earlier ages for these kids.
If you would like to hear more stories straight from women who have been incarcerated, check out One Girl Revolution's The Girl Inside on YouTube. One Girl Revolution took a film crew behind the walls of the largest single-site jail, Cook County Jail, and interviewed 5 incarcerated women. This short documentary highlights a life-changing academic class and the life and experiences of these 5 women, and what is revealed is the girl inside. You can watch The Girl Inside today on our website at onegirlrevolution.com. And now back to this episode of the One Girl Revolution podcast. And we can all do something too. I think seeing these kids, last week I was in Texas helping this woman who has an organization called Feeding Kids Right. And during the summer months, she goes around to really poor neighborhoods in Texas and she feeds kids that otherwise would be on food programs. And just sitting with these children and watching them like eat their little meals that they hadn't eaten, for 24 hours until she came back. We can all do something. It just kind of opened my eyes up to that if you see kids who are struggling, or of a family who maybe their parents have stuff going on, addiction or whatever else, we can step in and be there for those kids in any capacity, even just inviting them over for a dinner or a meal, or to come over for a barbecue.
Again, it's that simple act of kindness. But can we get out of our linear thinking that I, me, which everybody's involved in, and look a little bit and go, you know what? Or just like saying hello, or like, I love the people that are selling the paper for $1 because they're doing something. Buy a paper, like it's $1. You pay $3.50 for a cup of coffee.
Totally.
No, but I think the kid thing is because the number one answer across the board, we have over 3,000 handwritten answers, is no positive adult role model. Nobody that was there for me, that believed in me, that like encouraged me. No adult that was there. So, and I know in our busy lives, it's hard to mentor a kid. It is a job to do that. But there's little ways that we can all do stuff just with each other, but definitely with kids. And that the food programs like that's critical, because the number one reason for incarceration in the world is poverty. The number one reason for incarceration in the world is poverty. That is the overarching common theme, is poverty. So I think that when you think about those kids that are on free and reduced lunches, they aren't eating during the summer. Right. So what are they doing? Which affects their brain development, affects their ability to want to be good. No, when you're hungry, I get hangry.
Yeah, we all do. Right. Yeah, it's so important. And just even seeing that we can all do something. We all have a responsibility, honestly,
Yep.
to do something.
We should be doing. We do have a responsibility. And if you want to give money to something, give money. Check out the organization. Go
Yeah.
volunteer at the
Right.
organization. See what they're doing.
Right.
If you want to write a check, write a check. But like sometimes getting your hands dirty and getting in the trenches a little bit and understanding things makes you think of how you could do things differently as well in your daily life.
It gets us out of kind of
Our ego.
Yeah, our ego. And, one of my friends calls it the suck, like when you're sitting in the suck and like everything around you, you kind of like feel bad for yourself, but to actually help somebody else or do something outside of yourself can just change your perspective on everything, on life. Kim, what do you want people to know? Because I feel like there are a lot of misconceptions. First of all, women in prison are a forgotten about population, which we talked about. What do you want people to know about those women?
Oh, that they're just like their mothers and they're human beings. And like I said earlier, they were somebody's daughter, a long time ago. They're so articulate and smart. Like there's so much brain power behind walls. It's not what you would think is in prison. And lots of times people will watch the doc or some of our video and go, oh, they're so smart and articulate. Is that like a prison for smart people? It's like, no, they're people.
Yeah.
And some of them, it was one mistake. We had a kid one day go, Kim, I wish I knew that 10 seconds would cost me 10 years. He was 16. It was his first offense. 10 years. 10 seconds. First offense. So like there's, just because somebody is a felon, which is a title we have, like when somebody's going to hire them, like what happened? What was the felony? Like, can we work with you? Like there's a person behind, I always say there's a story behind every set of handcuffs that goes on, and understanding that is important. And I will say some of the women, when I walk in there, they're kinder to me than people on the outside.
Yeah.
They got stories, they got trauma. We all have that. They're figuring it out. The sad part is that sometimes is the interruption that they needed. Incarceration is the interruption that they needed in order to get healthy. That's a problem.
Yeah.
We should be doing things differently, especially if they're parents.
Yeah. You mentioned Brandy going into prisons, and she plays a Christmas show, right, every year, which is amazing. And that's actually how I found out about your story, because I was researching different things and then ended up on YouTube and found this video of Brandy going to play a show for the women. But she said something powerful, and I think there was a similar line in the documentary, that they've never felt more free than being in prison. And I thought that was really powerful. Have you felt that?
Yeah. Think about it. Like they don't have the pressure of where am I going to eat? Where am I going to sleep? How am I going to feed my kids? How am I going to hustle today? Because women can't hustle like men can hustle. And I think Ta at the beginning of the documentary says, I wish I didn't have to come to prison to get free. I wish I could have found that outside. So it is sad that is sometimes. And the other thing, education is huge. So now you have higher education that's being offered inside the prisons. Lots of times women on the outside, they're so busy working 16 jobs, they can't even get an education which would allow them a job that they would make more money at. So it's kind of backwards that they do have to come to prison to maybe unpack some stuff and figure out that they have worth. Like, oh my God, I'm actually going to college. I'm smart. Like these are things that we hear all the time. Like, you're really smart, but nobody's told you that. And it's sad that is sometimes the reality.
Yeah. What impact do you hope that the IF Project can have on the world, Kim?
I hope that the IF Project, the impact it can have is that we all have stories and we all have way more in common, and like breaking down some of those labels and those barriers and, bridging that us and them gap, and becoming a we and really understanding what that means and focusing on that, especially for women, because again, they are gatekeepers to the children.
What do you hope that the future holds for the IF Project? I know you've got a lot. You've accomplished so much in a span of what seems like a few short years. I'm sure it also feels like an eternity. But what do you hope that the future holds for the IF Project and everybody involved?
I hope that that we just continue to get people's stories out there, and as a result, we start blurring those lines, those us and them lines, and people are welcomed home differently after they've done their time. I hope that we can reduce incarceration and recidivism, going back in, by putting programs together that actually work and working with the people that have been impacted and bringing them to the table. I hope we get to go to I would love to go to different parts of the world and see what those answers are, even though we know from research that, a lot of the answers are very similar, but people having a voice is really powerful. And so how can we continue to amplify it?
What can people do to support the IF Project? And also, what can people do in their own communities?
So you can go to the website and check out what we're doing. We always love donations. I would say in your community, get involved with people that are doing reentry or working with youth. Give some of your time if you can. Money's great, but time is money too. So, and really understand the factors that lead to incarceration. Sometimes turn the TV off and do a little bit of a deep dive to understand. Media sometimes these horrific thing happened, and it's like, wonder what happened to that kid. Like, what was that person like when they were younger? Or, what's going on? Or how can I go and interrupt a kid that might be on that path or something? Mm-hmm. So I think just continuing to educate and to not be terribly judgmental. And I do need to say this, but I am not trying to tell a victim, hey, don't hate the person that did this, or hey, I want you to forgive everybody. I'm not trying to, I'll never want to take away what somebody's experience was. I wouldn't do that. What I would like to do is try to figure out the whys so that we can prevent further victims. We can reduce violence by understanding sometimes what has happened in the moment of that. So I think that's really important to highlight, because people are like, do you ever talk about the victims? I'm like, I do talk about the victims. We're trying to get the story out there to reduce the number of victims.
Yes.
So, and I think, I really think just being kind to each other. I know that sounds so like trite and maybe a little bit even corny, but it really does, even to strangers saying hello or smiling or doing something, you have no idea what that person's just gone through, that you could just interrupt a trajectory with that simple act.
Yeah, and you never know what somebody's going through at that moment.
You don't.
Too. It's like you could change. And I love those stories where you read them and it's like somebody was going down a really terrible path and having a terrible week or month or year or day, and somebody just smiled at them or paid for their coffee or, just saw them.
Paying forward. We need to get back to that, not to how many likes we have on Facebook.
Yeah.
Did they click this? Did they click that? Did they swipe this way and that way? Like, my God, like, what is happening?
Right.
And we have forgot. That's one thing I love about going in prison. There's no cell phones or technology.
Yeah.
You sit and have honest face-to-face conversation. There's no devices. You actually get to connect on a human level again that doesn't have an electronic attached to it. And that's extremely powerful. And we are losing that.
Yes.
And we're losing that with our kids.
Yeah, because kids are getting technology younger and younger, smartphones, all that stuff.
Oh my God, my niece can figure stuff out and I can't. Yeah, but it really is like that human engagement is critical.
Kim, at the end of every podcast episode, I always ask this question. So I'm going to ask you, you can answer it however you want. If you could leave women around the world with one message, what would it be?
That we quit tearing each other down as females and we start working together and building, I think, a fabric that can change the world. Absolutely. We have got to quit crab potting. We have to quit jealousy. We have to quit talking. Go and, the one person that you have the biggest issue with, why do you have it? Figure it out. Like, imagine if you have your biggest enemy as a female, because we're always fighting with each other, but you actually stand side by side and get the work done, you'll change everything. Yeah. We need to be a lot kinder to each other.
And to me, it all goes back to the if question. I hope that everybody who's listening takes that if question to heart. And even like, if thinking about with other women, if something was different, how would my relationship with them be different? I think the word if is so powerful. And thank you so much for all the great work that you do and for opening my eyes up to it. And I hope that everybody will watch the documentary on iTunes, The If Project. You have a TED Talk coming up sometime soon.
Yeah, I've got two that are out now, and then one that is going to be about being gender responsive, and it'll be out in a couple months.
Great. And then where can people find out more information about the If Project?
theifproject.com. It'll be rolling into .org soon. But yes, the If Project. If people forget, I always say Thief Project. I know it's terrible, but people have remembered from that.
Awesome. Well, Kim, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
All right.
Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at One Girl Revo. That's the number one girl REVO. And you can find more information on One Girl Revolution at onegirlrevolution.com. That's the number one girlrevolution.com.